Welcome back to Bold Dominion, a state news explainer podcast for a changing Virginia. I'm Mary Garner McGee. It's the holiday season, which means visiting family, hopefully enjoying some time off work, and at least for some, extra trips to the liquor store. That's right. According to Pew Research Center, Americans buy about 30% more alcohol and alcoholic beverages in December than the average month. If you're visiting D.C. or California or Indiana this holiday, that could mean more trips to the neighborhood liquor store or even the Costco. But here in Virginia, if you want peppermint schnapps or Bowman Brothers bourbon or Bailey's Irish cream, you'll be heading to a state-owned Virginia ABC store. But why is that? Why is the state the exclusive purveyor of liquor in Virginia? How did we get this system, and why do we still have it? This week, I'm joined by WTJU producer Sage Tangway. Sage and I have done a lot of research on this question, and we are very excited to discuss it. Thanks for coming on Bold Dominion, Sage.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so we're going to start with a few trivia questions. You ready? Okay. What does ABC stand for?
I want to say it stands for Alcoholic Beverage Control, but I feel like I might be wrong on the C.
No, you got it wrong on like all of, or you got it right on like all of it.
Great.
Yeah. So throughout, we'll be talking about VABC, and like the full title of that is Virginia Alcoholic Beverage Control Authority.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Fun fact: it recently changed from a state agency to a state authority. Okay, question number 2. How long has VABC operated stores in the state of Virginia?
See, this is one that I definitely wouldn't have known anything about other than for looking at some of the research for this podcast. But I have a feeling it's like from Prohibition times.
Yeah, that's totally right. Do you know when Prohibition ended?
No.
Okay, so Prohibition ended by the 21st Amendment, which passed in 1933. So Virginia has operated ABC stores for 90 years now. The first 4 stores opened in Richmond, and they opened within 2 months of Prohibition ending in Virginia.
Wow, I love that. They were like, okay, it's not illegal anymore, and now it is a government-operated entity.
And we're going to get these things open fast.
Yeah, exactly.
We're not waiting. Okay, great. How many VABC stores are currently operating in Virginia?
Oh my gosh, probably so many. I know we have like 8 here in Charlottesville. I'm going to take a guess and say like 300.
A little bit more.
Really? Like 400?
Yeah. So in November of 2023, they opened their 400th store.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm pretty sure right now the exact number is 402 because they've opened 2 stores since then. And I didn't see anything about any closing. So.
It's an infinitely growing opportunity, apparently. Okay.
Okay, question number 4. What was the best-selling spirit in Virginia in 2024? So this is not like type of spirit. We're looking for brand.
Oh, the specific one. So my knee-jerk reaction would be to say something like Jack Daniel's whiskey. Whiskey's pretty popular in Virginia. But
Jack Daniel's is number 3.
Oh, perfect. But many drinks are made with vodka, and Tito's vodka is the most popular in Virginia.
Yeah. It looks like I accidentally spoiled that one in the research document. Okay. So, yeah, Tito's is number 1, which is interesting. It's kind of like a mid-shelf vodka.
Yeah. Well, it's extremely affordable, but is not bitter the way a lot of cheap vodkas
Burnett's.
are. It's not Burnett's, yeah.
Okay. So, Tito's is number 1. Do you know what number 2 is?
Number 2. Is it a tequila? No. Is it also vodka?
It's Hennessy, which is cognac. Like I said, number 3 is Jack Daniel's. Number 4 is the first tequila, Patron.
Okay.
Then Jim Beam, Jameson Irish, Lunazol, Blanco, Maker's Mark, Grey Goose, and Crown Royal.
Wow.
So that's the top 10.
I'm a little shocked that Patron is the first most popular tequila. That's like...
What would you have guessed?
just anything lower shelf than that.
Yeah.
But I
yeah.
guess people aren't messing around when they drink tequila.
Well, but this is a great segue, which is that you will notice I did not ask what is the most popular spirit in Virginia, because the data that they released was not by units sold. It was by amount spent on that liquor.
Oh, okay. Okay. I see.
So it's by revenue.
Yep. Okay. That makes sense why Patron is top. Yeah.
Yeah. None of these are like bottom. Again, none of them are Burnett's.
Right. Yeah. They all sound pretty mid to top shelf, but I just would have thought that Jose Cuervo or something a little more approachable would have won out. But
it'd be interesting to see this broken down by like region.
Yes.
Because as we will talk about a few times, I'm sure, we live in a college town. So I would imagine the stats here might be a little different.
Yeah.
Okay. Last question. When Virginia ABC stores were first established in 1934, they were not open on Sundays. In what year did some VABC stores begin to open on Sundays?
Oh my gosh. I don't think I've ever been to an ABC store on a Sunday, and not for lack of trying. So I have no idea. Like, to my mind, I thought they were still closed.
You want to guess like a decade?
I want to say in the 60s.
No, it was 20 years ago, in 2004. So there are laws across the country for a long time that are called blue laws, which are like basically morality laws around like vices. And so, yeah, there were no liquor stores open in Virginia on Sundays until 2004. And now most ABC stores are open on Sundays from 1 to 6 p.m. But not all of them, because some counties have more restrictions.
Wow, that is very interesting. I had no idea. It's been a while since I've been seeking alcohol on a Sunday, though.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that was our trivia. Great job.
Yeah. So I've got a few questions about why the Virginia system is the way it is. First of all, like, why does every state in the United States have different ways of handling alcohol?
Yeah, so this is actually a provision in the U.S. Constitution. So you might remember from your 12th grade U.S. and Virginia SOLs that Prohibition passed nationally in 1919 as the 18th Amendment to the Constitution. And then, like we said earlier, in 1933, the 21st Amendment passed, which repealed the 18th Amendment on Prohibition, and it explicitly gave the states the right to regulate alcohol, liquor within their borders. So, now, at least in theory, the laws that we have in each state are a little bit different and sort of in interesting ways reflect the values of that state, or at least the difficulty in changing them and modernizing them. And this is one of those topics where there's policy at the federal level, at the state level, and also at the local level. So, most of the regulation of liquor happens at the state level. But, Virginia does have some counties that have liquor laws that are a little bit different from the state laws, although for a long time we had a number of dry counties, which had laws against selling liquor in general or just like more restrictions. And in 2019, there was a bill that passed the General Assembly and was signed by the governor that made all Virginia counties wet by default. But counties could pass a referendum to keep their dry status.
It's so interesting. I totally forgot that these two amendments existed at all. But what comes to mind right now is that right in between them is the 19th Amendment, women's right to vote. A lot of suffragettes were involved in the temperance movement. So that's what's coming to mind for me right now.
Yeah. The two movements were totally linked. Yeah.
So if states have this power, why is there a nationwide drinking age of 21 right now?
Yeah, so this is a very interesting legal workaround. So the national drinking age is actually tied to federal highway funding.
Of course it is. Of course it is.
Because, the Constitution says the states get to set the drinking age. So they had to, figure out how to work around this. So In 1984, the National Minimum Drinking Age Act was passed, and it said that states had to raise the minimum age to purchase alcohol from whatever it was before to 21. And if they didn't do that by 1986, they would lose 10% of their federal highway funding. So basically, they created a very strong incentive for states to set a drinking age of at least 21. And ostensibly, this law was passed to prevent drunk driving and, other societal harms. Mm-hmm. Mothers Against Drunk Driving was a pretty big supporter of the bill. But I think the history of the drinking age in the United States in general is pretty interesting. In the 18th and 19th centuries, anyone could drink, but mostly it was pretty low ABV beer and cider by modern standards. And so then after Prohibition ended, that is when most states set a formal drinking age for the first time. And most states set it to whatever their voting age was. And I had totally Mandela affected this, but the voting age used to be 21 in most states, which when I read that, I was like, oh my gosh, that just seems so odd to me.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems very old.
And it wasn't actually until the Vietnam War that the 26th Amendment lowered the voting age to 18 because of all the anti-war protests going on. That just really blew my mind.
Yeah, that feels very recent and very much a modern adaptation of our system.
So after the 26th Amendment, which lowered the voting age in the 70s, went into effect, about half the states lowered their drinking age in some capacity, again, in response to the Vietnam War protests.
Yeah, this is actually a very common disagreement basis that you hear people just kind of say in lay conversation about the drinking age, where they're like, well, if you have to pay taxes and, if you can vote and if you can be sent to war, you should be able to buy alcohol. So it's interesting to note, it used to be that way. It used to be a connected situation.
Yeah, them being not the same is a pretty modern phenomenon. So yeah, in Virginia, we really tracked these national trends. Before Prohibition, people could drink, but it was different. After Prohibition, it was 21, which was the voting age. And then in the 1970s, it went down to 18 for beer and wine and 21 for liquor. And then in the 1980s, the state, kind of gradually raised the drinking age to 21.
Okay, let's back up for a second and actually talk about the early adoption of temperance and what Virginia state law has looked like about alcohol throughout its whole history.
Yeah, so Virginia was an early supporter of the temperance movement. And just to quickly define the temperance movement, it was a movement in the United States to prevent the drinking of alcohol. A lot of people saw alcohol as a moral evil and promoting a lot of societal harms. And the temperance movement started picking up a lot of steam in the Reconstruction period. And many counties in Virginia, especially rural counties, started passing referendums to go dry between 1900 and 1914. And then in 1914, Virginia passed a statewide referendum with 60% of the vote. So by the time that the national constitutional amendment was being passed by states, Virginia had already been a dry state, basically had prohibition for a few years.
So why do you think people supported that movement, especially kind of coming before the federal movement? What made them want to crack down on alcohol?
Yeah, so I think it's a lot of moral, social issues today where it just kind of became a cultural phenomenon that picked up steam and people saw it as a way to harness power. Some historians will argue, I think this is pretty interesting. We mentioned that a lot of people were drinking pretty low alcohol by volume, cider and beer in the 18th century. But over time, access to hard liquor, especially rum, became a lot more widespread because of the colonization of South America and the Caribbean. So there a lot of historians say, alcoholism really did start to become a problem in America. And if you think about Virginia and some of these other states that had ties to the sugar plantations in South America, like rum was becoming readily available. And I think people were seeing, the bad effects of alcoholism on a lot of people and saying, this is a social ill. We should do something about this. But in addition, kind of like I mentioned before, it was sort of this like paternalist notion that alcohol was causing social ills, particularly among lower class people. And a lot of upper class people were like, it's not going to affect us. We're still going to have access to it. We'll buy it in other states.
Right, exactly.
And, we're still having the same debate about the criminalization of a lot of other drugs in the United States. Like this tension between should we give people access to substances that are harmful to them or potentially harmful to them for reasons of freedom, or should we limit access to those substances because we think that they're bad for society? So it's not a new debate that we're having at all. And temperance, I think we think of as this like failure and this like crazy thing. But again, now in modern society, we're having the same conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So by the time of the 18th Amendment, Virginia had already banned alcohol sales completely.
Yep. Yeah. So, of course, this did not stop drinking in Virginia. Like, Virginia has a lengthy coastline. It has a lot of ports. It was not hard to bootleg alcohol in via our waterways. And then also, there were many people distilling their own alcohol. This was not like a secret thing that only a few people knew how to do. So, again, Prohibition was, I think, pretty widely seen as a failure. And so when it ended in 1933, Virginia kind of started this ABC store system from scratch. And honestly, the ABC stores, I don't think they're really all that different from the system we still have today. Now, the big difference is that in 1933, when they set up these stores, liquor was meant to be bought at the ABC store and consumed at home. So you couldn't go out and order a cocktail or a mixed drink until, do you want to guess the year?
Is it sometime mid-century?
Yeah, so you couldn't go out and buy a drink outside of your home until 1968, when state law changed and Virginia started granting liquor licenses to restaurants. And this changed mostly under pressure from the tourism industry in Virginia.
Wow, that's very interesting.
Yeah. And I'll add to, in 1933, when they set this up, the ABC stores, like today, were to sell hard liquor. Like, beer and wine were allowed to be served and were not as regulated.
Yeah, this is actually really funny. Sometimes I watch YouTube videos about cocktail creation and cocktail history, and so much of modern cocktail culture has its roots in Prohibition and in speakeasy culture, and there's a lot of practices and approaches to liquor that start during that time period and then apparently just continue through mid-century, and then people are able to order it, and that's where it really becomes like a craft.
Yeah.
So you use the word restaurant, and I know that Virginia doesn't have any bars. Could you tell me more about that?
Yep. So might be hard to believe, if you're here in Charlottesville, driving down a certain street where students like to hang out. But legally, Virginia does not have any bars. So the law is that Virginia ABC will not grant liquor licenses to bars, only restaurants. And so a restaurant has to have 45% of its revenue come from food sales. And I remember hearing this for the first time and being like, how is that possible?
Even right now, I'm thinking of fully functioning restaurant bars that exist in this town. And just with the sheer amount of, it's not that they're not also selling food during the day, but with the sheer amount of drinks they sell at night, I'm just shocked that it would balance out.
Yeah, so it doesn't always. So VABC publishes the outcomes of all of its hearings. So a business gets in trouble with ABC, there's a hearing, and then at the end of the year they say, here's all the hearings and here's the outcomes. And I looked through it, and honestly, shockingly few number of places get cited for not meeting this 45% quota, but when they do, typically they pay a fine, it looks like, from going through these documents. And, this ratio of 45% has come up in the General Assembly before, and it hasn't passed. It could come up again this year. There's some news articles out there sort of predicting that this might be an issue this year. And if it does, some of the options on the table would be to decrease it to 35%. So in order to maintain your status as a restaurant and maintain your liquor license, you would only have to get 35% of your total revenue from food, or, get rid of it entirely.
What does the ABC do besides selling liquor?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Let me back up a little bit. The ABC has three main functions. So the first one we've talked about some, and that's maintain a monopoly on liquor sales and generate revenue for the state general fund. So a big reason, I think, why we've kept the system for so long is that it is very lucrative for the state to be able to set prices on liquor and then also gain tax revenue and get all the profits from the ABC stores, which, again, are quite profitable because they set the price of liquor. So in 2023, Virginia ABC contributed $609 million to the general fund, so over $500 million. So that's the first thing. It's maintaining all those stores. The next thing that they do is issue licenses to businesses to sell and serve alcohol. So, that's where they're looking at like that 45% rule, and new restaurants, can apply to serve liquor. Also, occasionally individuals or organizations can apply directly to the ABC for like a license to sell liquor, like for a specific event, like a wedding or a family reunion. So that's the second thing that they do, is kind of like regulate the sale of poured liquor. And then the third thing that they do is enforce the alcohol laws generally. So that's, the minimum drinking age, making sure people aren't like over serving people dangerously, enforcing that 45% rule, enforcing the law that if you are a business in the state of Virginia, you have to buy liquor from ABC. You can't buy it from like a wholesaler. And so that wing is law enforcement agents. They have full police power in the state of Virginia.
Wow. So how do they enforce some of those laws? Like, some of those sound like courtroom situations, and some of those sound like on-the-street investigation situations.
Yep. Yeah. So ABC agents have had, like I said, full police power since 1936. And again, like I also said before, they also publish lists of their administrative hearings for the year. So I spent quite a bit of time pouring through these lists. And it seems like by far the most common reason for a hearing is that a business with a liquor license has sold alcohol, has been caught selling alcohol to an underage person. So this is enforced through the VABC's underage buyer program. In this program, they recruit teenagers aged 16 to 19 and they pay them to be accompanied by an ABC special agent, so like a ABC police officer. And those two people, will walk into a store or a restaurant or somewhere that sells alcohol. They're both undercover. And the teenager will go up to the counter with a 6-pack of beer. And if the person behind the counter doesn't card them or cards them, sees their real ID that says that they are under the age of 21 and still sells them the liquor, then the special agent is there and they will cite them for serving alcohol or selling alcohol to someone under 21. And they do about 400 checks per month across Virginia.
Wow.
And again, a lot of businesses get cited for this every year. And it looks like there's typically about a $2,500 fine for a first offense of selling alcohol to an underage person. So that's the most common one. Another common thing they enforce is businesses not keeping adequate records. So if you have a liquor license, you're required to keep track of that revenue. and report it to ABC if you aren't doing that properly. You can get in trouble for that. Another common offense is that businesses will buy liquor from ABC with a bad check. So their check bounces.
Yeah.
That's something that ABC keeps track of, not meeting that 45% threshold of food sales. And most of these, again, looking at the data, result in fines. But places do get their liquor licenses suspended or even revoked for these types of violations.
Okay. So I feel like I basically understand what's going on in the state of Virginia. But, like, what are other states doing?
Yeah. So states like Virginia that maintain a monopoly on liquor sales are often called alcohol beverage control states or just control states. And Virginia is one of 17 control states. So there's kind of two categories of alcohol. There's beer and wine, and then there's liquor. And so in most control states like Virginia, you know, the beer and wine you can buy at grocery stores, like privately owned businesses, and it's just the liquor that is a state monopoly. Other states do have like two main ways of managing liquor sales. So one common way that states do it is they allow beer and wine to be sold in grocery stores, but not liquor. But what makes them different from control states is that the liquor isn't sold in a state-owned liquor store. It's sold in a privately owned liquor store. So they still want to keep the liquor out of the grocery stores and convenience stores, but the state doesn't run the liquor stores. So liquor stores often in these states have to have like a special permit, but they are not state-owned. And again, this dates back to ideas from the temperance movement that, you know, you want to keep liquor away from like the delicate ladies and children and stuff and polite society. And these days, these privately owned liquor stores have lobbies. Like, they don't want liquor to be sold in grocery stores because, you know, why would you go to a privately owned liquor store if you could buy it at the grocery store?
Right.
So that's a common system that you'll see in other places. And then the third system is allowing everything to be sold in a grocery store. So, like, liquor can be sold alongside beer and wine at your regular Kroger and Safeway and Costco. And people might be familiar with this system if they ever go to D.C. And in D.C., like, not any grocery store or convenience store can sell liquor. They have to, like, meet certain criteria and apply for a permit. But, you know, you can go to the Costco there, go to a grocery store and purchase liquor. And they also have privately owned liquor stores.
Okay. Wow.
Any questions?
I don't think so. I'm thinking about how much I actually personally like our state-run liquor stores here in Virginia.
I have to say, I think I kind of came into this topic with like almost this bias against them, you know, but yeah, I am not mad about it. Tell me more.
Yeah, so I think part of it is like it's the system I'm used to. And so it's easy for me. But I really also appreciate sort of the regulation, both in terms of like legal regulation, but also just of what products are available in every ABC store. Now, they do have different availabilities of products. You can't find everything in every ABC store, of course. But the selection that you can count on being at any Virginia ABC store is very broad, and it's very middle of the road what you're expecting to get. So I like that as a consumer, I like that I can kind of count on what I can find there. Whereas my experiences with privately owned liquor stores in other states, unless it was a massive warehouse where they're like, we are an alcohol depot, like come and get everything here. But if I'm just going to a small store, it's really dependent on who's doing the buying for that store, what they have, and it might not be what I want.
Yeah, and it's a monopoly, you know? Like, they don't have to compete with anything. They don't have to carve out a niche for themselves. You know, there's a part of town where there's an affordable grocery store, and there's an organic grocery store, and there's a big warehouse grocery store. There's a Trader Joe's. But there's only one ABC store. And so that ABC store has to appeal to all of those types of consumers.
I also like feeling like I'm going to the postal office when I go to the ABC store. And like, you know, when you're getting ready for a party, you like have to make your little list and it's a separate stop from like the grocery store and you have to know exactly what you're getting.
It's so funny. I'm 28 now, but I still feel like sometimes when I walk to the ABC store, I'm like a little nervous. And I never went to an ABC store when I was underage, but like it's kind of a weird feeling, you know.
It's like a doctor's office or like, you know, again, the post office is like another thing. And maybe it's because like I really like that type of state-run agency. You know, I love regulation. What can I say? I'm a regulatory gal.
I think the biggest argument in favor of it is that it does generate a lot of revenue for the state of Virginia. And I mean, I think sometimes taxes on vice goods, you know, can be quite regressive and like they have a larger impact on people who have lower incomes. And there is an element of like dependency on some of these things. I don't want to minimize that, but you know, I don't, for example, think we should necessarily have like state-run monopolies on produce, right? Like,
right.
Because we want as low of a price as possible on produce.
Yeah.
But, you know, given that people can buy beer and wine in a grocery store, having this monopoly, the trade-off is that it is able to generate a lot of revenue for the state of Virginia.
I also have the feeling that, like, I know liquor prices are lower in other states, but I just have a feeling that if we were to suddenly make our state-run system private, it wouldn't necessarily compete downwards. I think some of the issues with, are we making people dependent on this thing that they then pay premium for? I don't know if that issue would go away in a private system in Virginia specifically.
Yeah. I also think there's just this, like, very interesting tension that you kind of hit on between the fact that on the one hand, ABC stores are like trying to generate profits and like sell products, but on the other hand, they're also in charge of safe drinking promotion. And I don't know that tension is bad, but it is interesting. Like I can't think of other organizations that kind of have that like dual mission.
Yeah, like the DMV who grants you your license is not the cop that pulls you over for speeding. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I agree. It is a curious situation, and I'm not saying it's perfect, but I do like it as a consumer. What do you think about bars in Virginia and having like pure bars?
Yeah, that's a really I do think it's kind of a silly rule.
I don't see how it would change though. Like like you said, some of the bars or some of the bar restaurants around here, I just think of as bars anyway. So it's hard for me to completely envision what that would be like, even though in other states I have been to pure bars. They just never felt different enough for me to like really notice.
Yeah, I think it's a weird quirk. I'm honestly really surprised that in all these past efforts to change the rule that they haven't gone through.
Yeah.
Do you think it's dangerous for places to only serve liquor? Like, do you think that having food available is like a safety measure?
You know, I don't know. I think this kind of gets into that whole like paternalism argument of like, when it comes down to it, people who want to drink at noon are going to drink at noon. And I don't know. I don't know if not having a bar versus having a bar restaurant really significantly changes it. I do think from a health perspective, it's always good to have food when drinking is happening. But that's what bar mix is for, right?
And I mean, so many people have been to a bar when they're like, kitchen's closing.
Yeah,
you know?
I mean, there's a time of day that they are just serving alcohol at all of these places. So, yeah, I don't necessarily, I don't know. When I envision what the prohibitionists are worried about, my brain becomes very like cartoonish, like 1930s train hobo. Like that's what I think they're envisioning.
Yeah, like a saloon.
Yeah, like and so like I don't really know.
There's a funny quote in one of these about the restaurant rules where they were like, if we allow liquor to be poured in restaurants, it will be a saloon in every way except for the swinging doors. Like
amazing. I mean, what's okay, you're not making it sound any less attractive, but yeah. So I don't really know.
I think the enforcement piece is sort of interesting too. You know, here in Charlottesville, there was a very high profile incident where a student experienced police brutality at the hands of ABC agents. And I think the fact that they are so often undercover is something that should maybe get more attention. Because if you think about it, if a person who appears to be a random person walks up to you and starts like demanding things of you, I think a lot of people's instinct is not to trust them, you know?
Yeah, absolutely not.
So I think that we should think carefully about what role any undercover law enforcement takes in our society and like the potential for physical harm.
Absolutely. I agree.
You know, I'm hearing a lot about Gen Z drinking less. Do you think that will have an impact on this system?
Maybe. I mean, I don't necessarily think it'll have an impact on the legal side of it, but it might change. We might not be seeing 2 more ABC stores per year, you know, like we might not see that kind of expansion. But also, like, I would be curious to see how those numbers continue. If that continues to be a trend, then yeah, it'll probably impact it eventually.
Yeah. And then, you know, there's been a lot of changes in cannabis legislation and THC legislation. Do you think that the ABC stores provide like a model? You know, how might ABC inform cannabis legislation?
Well, I do think if you are in a control state like Virginia, it makes sense to be working towards a similar setup in cannabis. I think that there's a lot of great models for what like the point of service for cannabis looks like in a lot of other states where they're basically privately owned dispensaries, but they're like heavily regulated still. There's like a lot of lab testing and there's a lot of law enforcement and you have to have the right IDs and stuff like that. But I think that the biggest difference is like cannabis dispensary culture has always been more of a boutique experience than what I would associate with Virginia ABC. I don't think there's going to be a time where you walk in to a cannabis store, grab something off a shelf, and like go to a counter the way there is at ABC. I think it will maintain to be a behind-the-counter seller experience.
Which was how ABC operated for a long time, actually.
That makes sense.
I don't remember the exact year, but there was a point in the mid-century when they started having the stores that we see today instead of behind the counter. There is an interesting parallel, though, where like there was a period of prohibition, and then we had to start a legal system after a period of illegal operation.
Right.
And, you know, you hear a lot in these discussions about like the potential for states to rake in tax revenue on cannabis. And I do think that this control monopoly system like provides a good model for that. I mean, over $500 million in revenue. Or in, you know, money contributed to the state.
Exactly.
So, yeah. Thank you so much for talking, Sage.
Thanks for having me.
This was fun. You've been listening to me, Mary Garner McGee, and Sage Tangway, a fellow producer at WTJU. I also want to thank our assistant producer, Sarah Bastinelli, for help on research with this episode. You can find more episodes at bolddominion.org or wherever else you listen to podcasts. We will be back in the new year. Have a great break and see you in 2025.